Let me say something that most men don't want to hear, but deep down, you already know it's true. Some people don't lose feelings when they walk away. They lose control. And for avoidants, that loss of control is terrifying. See, when an avoidant leaves you, it doesn't always mean they're done. Sometimes, it means they're overwhelmed. And there's a big difference. The mistake most men make is assuming distance equals indifference. That silence means peace. That pulling away means you didn't matter. That's not how the avoidant mind works. Avoidants don't obsess the way anxious people do. They don't call. They don't beg. They don't confess. They repress. They deny. They distract. But obsession doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to name it. It just goes underground. And here's the controversial part. An avoidant can be deeply affected by you, even obsessed with you, while acting completely unbothered on the surface. In fact, the more self-controlled, calm, and grounded you were as a man, the harder it hits them after you're gone. Most men think obsession looks like chasing, texting, showing emotion. But for avoidants, obsession looks like watching from a distance. It looks like sudden curiosity. It looks like checking in, by accident. It looks like remembering things they claim they forgot. It looks like rewriting the story so they don't have to face how much you mattered. This video isn't about feeding ego or giving false hope. It's about clarity. Because when you understand how avoidants actually operate, you stop taking their behavior personally, and you stop misreading the signs. And more importantly, you stop chasing validation from someone who's already internally conflicted about you. What I'm about to share are 5 signs an avoidant is secretly obsessed with you, but will never openly admit it. Not because they don't feel it, but because admitting it would mean facing vulnerability, accountability, and emotional exposure. Things avoidants are trained to avoid. If you've ever felt confused by mixed signals, if you've ever wondered why someone who pulled away never truly disappeared, or if you've ever felt like your presence lingered longer than the relationship itself, then stay with me. Because once you see these signs clearly, you'll never misinterpret avoidant behavior the same way again. Let me start this one with something that might sting a little, so lean in for a second. If an avoidant truly didn't care, you wouldn't feel confused. You'd feel dismissed, forgotten, replaced. But confusion is emotional residue. One of the strongest signs an avoidant is secretly obsessed with you is this. They create distance, but they never close the door. They pull away, but they leave just enough access to remind you they still exist in your world. And that's not accidental. That's internal conflict. Avoidants don't walk away because they feel nothing. They walk away because they feel too much and don't know how to regulate it. So instead of processing connection, they manage it by controlling space. Distance becomes their coping mechanism. Here's where most men get it wrong. They see the withdrawal and assume they should chase harder, explain more, or prove their value. But the truth is, an avoidant who is obsessed isn't trying to erase you. They're trying to mute the emotional noise you created inside them. Notice the pattern. They disappear, but they don't block you. They go quiet, but they resurface randomly. They say they need space, yet react when you seem unbothered. They detach, but stay emotionally aware of what you're doing. That's not disinterest. That's resistance. An avoidant who has fully moved on doesn't hover. They don't check for openings. They don't keep emotional doors cracked. When someone truly doesn't matter anymore, there's no internal debate about access. But when you mattered, when you challenged their independence, their control, or their emotional comfort zone, they pull back, but they don't let go. And here's the controversial truth most men miss. The calmer you were, the stronger this effect becomes. Men who didn't beg. Men who didn't explode emotionally. Men who didn't lose their frame. Those men don't get forgotten. They become unresolved chapters. And avoidants hate unresolved emotional experiences because they don't know how to close them without confronting vulnerability. So instead of choosing clarity, they choose distance with connection. This is why they might vanish for weeks, then reappear casually, or react strongly when you stop engaging, or suddenly show interest the moment you regain momentum in your own life. It's not about rekindling, it's about regulating how much emotional influence you still have. Their behavior isn't strategic in a calculated way. It's protective. They're managing attachment without admitting attachment exists. And this is where men need to wake up. If you chase during this phase, you teach them they can stay conflicted without consequence. But if you stay grounded, non-reactive, and self-directed, something uncomfortable happens inside them. They're forced to feel the loss instead of escaping it. Pulling away while keeping you emotionally nearby is a sign of obsession masked as detachment. Not love. Not commitment. But fixation they don't know how to process. Understand this, and you stop chasing silence. You start respecting the power of your absence. Let me say this plainly, because most men underestimate it. Avoidants don't stop paying attention just because they stop participating. One of the clearest signs an avoidant is secretly obsessed with you is this. They stay informed without being involved. They know what's going on in your life, even though they claim they need space or are focused on themselves. That's not coincidence. That's surveillance driven by unresolved attachment. Avoidants are extremely good at emotional self-control on the surface. But underneath that control is curiosity, especially toward people who made them feel something they couldn't regulate. And instead of confronting those feelings directly, they observe from a safe emotional distance. They watch without engaging. They notice changes without commenting. They stay updated without showing interest. This allows them to feel connected without feeling exposed. Here's the controversial part men often miss. Avoidants don't monitor people they feel neutral about. They monitor emotional threats, people who could pull them back into vulnerability. If you were just another option, you'd fade into the background. But if your presence disrupted their emotional equilibrium, they keep tabs. Quietly, carefully, without giving you leverage. You might notice subtle signs of this. They reference things you never told them directly. They react when you shift your routine. They seem aware of moments they weren't invited into. That awareness doesn't come from nowhere. Comes from attention. And attention is a form of emotional investment, even when it's hidden. Now here's where men often sabotage themselves. They interpret this quiet observation as an invitation. A green light to reach out. To reopen communication. To clarify things. But watching is not the same as choosing. For avoidance, watching is a compromise. It's how they keep you psychologically close while maintaining emotional control. They get reassurance without risk. Familiarity without responsibility. And the more unavailable you become, emotionally calm, focused, and forward-moving, the harder this internal conflict becomes for them. Because they're no longer just observing you. They're observing themselves react. That's where obsession lives. Not in messages. Not in confessions. But in constant mental checking. Avoidants struggle the most when they can't predict you. When you stop feeding the narrative they created in their head. When your life continues without emotional chaos. That stability makes them question whether distance actually solved anything. Here's the key lesson for men. If someone is watching you closely but refusing to engage directly, don't perform for them. Don't signal. Don't seek validation. Your power in this phase is neutrality. Because the more you remain centered and self-directed, the more their hidden curiosity turns into internal tension. And that tension is the price of emotional avoidance. They may never admit they're watching. They may never explain why they care. But attention without participation is still attachment, just one they're afraid to own. Let's talk about the quiet, because that's where avoidants reveal the most. When an avoidant goes silent, most men assume it means relief. Like the tension is gone. Like they've finally moved on. But for avoidants, silence isn't peace. It's containment. It's where thoughts loop, memories resurface, and emotions they didn't process start knocking again. If you matter to them, silence doesn't erase you. It amplifies you. This is the part that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. You can feel it in the way the connection doesn't feel finished. There's no emotional closure. Just an unresolved energy that lingers. That's because avoidants don't process emotions in real time. They delay them. So while you're out living, recalibrating, regaining balance, they're replaying moments internally. Conversations. Decisions. Feelings they pushed aside because dealing with them felt like losing control. And here's the part most men don't realize. Avoidants think about people more when there's no emotional pressure. When you stop reaching out. When you stop asking for clarity. When you stop trying to fix things. That absence removes their defense mechanisms. There's nothing to push against anymore. No tension to manage externally. So the focus turns inward. That's when you start occupying mental space. Not because you're doing anything, but because you're no longer trying to be seen. Avoidants struggle with unresolved emotional loops. They need narratives that protect their independence and self-image. When someone leaves quietly, or stops reacting, it disrupts those narratives. It forces reflection without confrontation. And reflection is uncomfortable for them. You might feel this as a strange pull. A sense that they're more affected now than when things ended. A feeling that your absence weighs heavier than your presence ever did. That's not imagination. That's delayed processing. Here's the truth men need to understand. An avoidant can think about you constantly and still say nothing. Still do nothing. Still choose distance. Thinking doesn't equal acting for them. It equals regulating. So if you're measuring interest by effort alone, you'll misread the entire situation. Avoidants internalize. They intellectualize. They compartmentalize. But the mind doesn't lie. If you remain calm, self-contained, and forward-focused, you become harder to mentally dismiss. Not because you're chasing, but because you're no longer available to reassure their ego. Silence becomes the mirror. And in that mirror, they're forced to sit with the impact you had. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a romantic way. But in a way that lingers. That's obsession without expression. And for avoidance, that's as real as it gets. This is where I need to talk to you directly, man to man. If an avoidant is testing you instead of choosing you, it's not because they're unsure you matter. It's because they're unsure they can handle what choosing you would demand of them. So instead of committing, they probe. They observe. They apply pressure and watch how you respond. And here's the hard truth. A lot of men fail this stage without realizing it. Avoidants test in subtle ways. They pull back to see if you chase. They delay responses to see if you destabilize. They create ambiguity to see if you'll over-explain, over-invest, or abandon your center. These tests aren't about attraction. They're about emotional safety. They're asking themselves, if I get closer to this man, will I lose control of myself? So they look for signs that you're grounded, self-led, and emotionally regulated. But many men interpret testing as rejection, and react from fear. They start explaining. They start proving. They start negotiating their value. And the moment you do that, the test answers itself. Avoidants don't feel safer when you chase clarity. They feel pressure. And pressure is exactly what they're trying to avoid. So they pull back even more, reinforcing the cycle. Here's the criticism you might need to hear. If you keep trying to win someone who won't choose you clearly, you're teaching them they don't have to. An avoidant who is obsessed but unhealed will drag connection out as long as you allow ambiguity. Not out of malice, but out of fear. They want the emotional benefit without the emotional responsibility. And this is where men need to wake up. Your job is not to pass tests you never agreed to take. Calm consistency is not chasing. Self-respect is not withdrawal. Boundaries are not ultimatums. When you stay centered, when you don't rush to fix confusion, you disrupt their testing strategy. You force them to confront a choice. Step forward, or lose access. And for avoidance, loss of access is far more threatening than emotional confrontation. Here's the advice that matters. Stop trying to be chosen. Start behaving like someone who only allows clear connection. If an avoidant is obsessed, testing will eventually exhaust them. They either move toward you, or they retreat to protect their comfort. Either way, you win clarity. And clarity is power. This is the sign most men completely overlook, because it doesn't look like obsession at all. It looks like detachment, like indifference, like someone who's moved on. But pay attention. When an avoidant can't reconcile how deeply you affected them with how little emotional control they feel, they do something very specific. They rewrite the story. Not out loud. Not dramatically. Internally. They downplay the connection. They minimize what you shared. They reframe the ending in a way that makes them feel strong, independent, and unaffected. This isn't about honesty, It's about self-protection. Because admitting your impact would mean admitting vulnerability. And for avoidance, vulnerability threatens identity. So instead of saying, that connection mattered more than I expected, the narrative becomes, it just wasn't that serious. Instead of, I wasn't ready, it becomes, we weren't compatible. That reframing isn't peace. It's defense. Here's the controversial truth. You don't rewrite stories about people who meant nothing to you. Neutral connections fade quietly. They don't need revision. They don't need justification. But meaningful ones, those demand psychological explanation, especially when they end without emotional resolution. So the avoidant edits. They convince themselves they chose distance. Not that distance chose them. They emphasize your flaws in their mind, not because you were deeply flawed, but because it helps them stay emotionally regulated. And here's where men get tripped up. They hear this rewritten version secondhand, or sense the emotional coolness, and they think, maybe it really didn't matter. But rewriting is not forgetting. In fact, the need to mentally downgrade you is proof you still occupy space. Obsession doesn't always look like longing. Sometimes it looks like rationalization. Avoidants struggle with emotional contradiction. They want autonomy and connection, but can't hold both comfortably. So when someone threatens that balance, the mind steps in to restore control. By changing the meaning of the relationship. Here's the key thing for you to understand as a man. You don't need to correct their version of events. You don't need to defend yourself. And you definitely don't need to chase validation from a story that isn't being told for truth. Your calm silence speaks louder than their internal edits. Because when your life moves forward without resentment or reaction, it destabilizes the rewritten narrative. It introduces a quiet question they can't ignore. If he wasn't important, why does his absence still register? That question lingers. And that lingering is the final form of avoidant obsession. Not loud, not dramatic, but unresolved. Here's the truth most men aren't ready to hear. Avoidance can be obsessed with you and never admit it, and the louder they deny it, the stronger it often is. That denial isn't freedom. They're just protecting their ego while your presence still controls their thoughts. Most men waste energy chasing clarity from someone who's obsessed but emotionally unavailable. And that's where the power lies. When you step back, stay grounded, and focus on your own life, you force them to face the reality they can't admit, the truth they've been hiding even from themselves. So here's my challenge to you. Stop overanalyzing every text, every silence, every reaction. Recognize the signs we've discussed, respect your own value, and let absence do the talking. You'll see who is quietly obsessed without needing it spelled out. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment about your experience with avoidance. Share your story, your confusion, your wins. I'll read every comment and connect with as many of you as I can because I want you to understand this isn't just theory. It's real, and it's happening to men everywhere. Remember, obsession doesn't always shout, it whispers. And if you know how to listen, you'll see the truth most men never recognize.